Welcome to my ArtiosCAD Tutorial Series. Today I'm going to start discussing the concept of designing parametrically. It's a part of the efficiency series where I go over simple ways that ArtiosCAD can help you be a more efficient designer. If you doubt the accuracy of the information you've been provided, you can save yourself a lot of future headache. It takes a little bit of planning, but your future self will definitely thank you for being prepared when the specifications do get changed. And I want to design an insert for this backfiller to help prevent the blocker from collapsing. A simple double X partition should work, and it wouldn't take long to design one from scratch. But again, I'm not certain that I've been provided with accurate information. So rather than design with actual dimensions, I'm going to design my part with variables so that I can rebuild it later. I'm going to be using some keyboard shortcuts in this tutorial to speed things up a bit. If you need tips on specific tools, look into the other videos on my channel. I've decided that I'm going to base the design on the inside dimensions of the backfiller box. So I figure out the ID of the box based on the dimensions in the rendering, but we'll come back to that in a bit. I'm just going to start with a rectangle. And rather than typing out the number that I want in the fields at the bottom, I'm going to use variables. So I will type L in the first box and hit enter. And Artios presents me with this notification that L is an undefined variable. So yes, I do wish to define it. So for this part of the drawing, I'm just going to start with 12 inches, something very basic. And I'm going to name it length so that it's easier to figure out later when I come back to this in a couple months. And so now it's asking for the other dimension for this rectangle. So rather than typing a number, I'm going to do width. We'll do that. Let's go 10, name it width. And there we go. Now we have a top view of our box. And if I want to do a double X partition, I will go from one corner to the center of the opposite panels and then back up. I don't actually need all of these lines because I'm only going to use the dimension of this line to do the math, but I'm going to show it from the top view so that I can use this later in an illustration, and that'll be in a follow-up video to this. I will use this as a guide for future users on what this part is going to look like. So I'm going to dimension this real quick. And these are the inside dimensions of our box. So now the next line I'm going to draw. Now I want to draw a vertical line, 0 angle, but for this I want to use D. And let's go 8. And this would be the inside depth of my box. So there we go. Now I'm going to use the rectangle from a line tool, and I'm going to pull this line out. But rather than using a number, I'm going to use a variable. But this time, instead of typing a letter, I'm going to hit the space key, and it brings up ArtiosCAD's expression builder. And you can type in any math you want in here. It shows you, it previews the answer for you. And you also have access to the values that are currently in the design. And you can see, so the length, width, depth that I've defined, caliper of the board, inside loss, and it's an outside gain, and it's using the values that are actually in the database information for the board that was selected when I created the new design. But what we're going to be using here are these two buttons. This one is the length of a line, and this is the distance between 2 points. This would let me click on two endpoints of separate lines, and uh, it would put the expression for that distance in here. But I'm going to do the absolute length of a line. I'm going to click here, and it's telling me that it's 11.662. Well, it doesn't take into account the thickness of the board, which would bind up down here. It doesn't take into account the outside gain or the inside loss. It doesn't take into account any of the thicknesses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract a cal for the corner. I'm going to subtract another cal for down here. And then I'm going to subtract 2 times cal just to make it easier to get in the box. And so the reason I'm using cal instead of 1/8 is because I can rerun this for C-flute and it would change these to 3/16. So I hit OK on that and it stretches it out where it needs to be. So now I'm going to put the slot in. And now the way I'm going to do the slot, instead of doing a 1/4 inch slot, since this angle right here can be pretty acute, I don't want 3/16 inch board to bind up in a 1/4 inch slot. I don't ever want to bind up. So I'm going from the midpoint, I'm going to do a parallel line. I'm going to hit space. I'm going to do cal times 1.5. And then I'm going to mirror this line from the midpoint. And then I'm going to trim this. And there I've got my slot. Now, this area here, you got to be careful with that, because if you use this trim tool, the trim interior section, but to trim out the section here between these two lines, this particular design isn't necessarily complex enough to cause problems later, but a lot of the designs that you would want to rebuild, if you use that particular trim tool right there that just takes that out, it could cause issues with the math and force the design to blow up when you rebuild it. So what I recommend is using the split tool. Split this line on that point, and you could either, at that point, you could trim to this corner, or you could do a radius. So I'm going to blend it, but I want the user to be able to adjust the radius of this blend. So I'm going to call it B, and I'm going to define a new value, 0.5 blend radius. And now I can do this, and we have one panel of our X partition. So I mirror it on that line. I change this line to crease, and there we go. We have our partition set. Whoops. Let's see here. Let's do this so that we can do some double check here. We can dimension. Anything we dimension here is going to be dimensioned on the rebuild. So let's do this as well. Go to the midpoint, and so we can double check. We can do the length of this line. So we double check, make sure that's less than that. And looks like we're good right here. So now I'm just ready for my first test. Hit F5, assuming your keyboard shortcuts are the default. And you see I have no preview of what the design will look like. I will add that in a later video. So let's go something that's going to be closer to what I'm actually working on. That's 12 and depth is 24. Let's change the blend so that we can see the difference. Hit OK. And boom, we see our boxes a different proportion. We've got 11 1/4-ish, 11, so we got that less than half. Looks like we're good to go. All that's left now is to press F5 and use the dimensions from my rendering to get the actual dimensions, and I'm done. It's ready to change when the customer comes back with changes. Thanks a lot for watching.